above all, I truly believe live and let live. We're not fighting for... The fight is not to force anyone to become anything. The fight is to be able to freely exist without fear of discrimination or being murdered or any type of treatment that makes you feel any less of a person. So we're really just trying to exist. The point of the agenda is to exist freely, not to force anything on anyone or turn any children as well, because that seems to be a recurrent theme.
Really, tell us your name.
My name is Lutho Biela. Contrary to popular belief, it's Xhosa, it's not Zulu. It doesn't mean nothing. It actually, in a sentence, into or umtu olulutho is something or someone that is of great benefit. That was my mom's intention with the name, my name. Yeah, and as you probably have guessed, I come from the Eastern Cape, which is basically Xhosa territory. So I am a Xhosa person. I grew up in Danzane, which is a township in East London, which is also another town. Tiny, uneventful, not tiny, but uneventful town in the Eastern Cape. Yeah. Okay. So my background is very intersectional, and I think that's something most young people today share, or most people that come from a township, low-income residential type, low-income residential type background. I grew up in Danzane. Danzane is it's a typical Kasi with lots of struggle, amidst all the struggle, be it financial, be it societal, be it with drugs, it's also a very close-knit community. So I come from a very close-knit community. Our neighbors aren't just people that live next door. Our neighbors are, to some extent, a part of our family. We know everyone, we know generations of everyone, not only in the street, but in the area, Danzane. And amidst all of that, I studied in the main town, which is East London, about 45 minutes away. That's my school background, which was then a private school, so which was perceived better than having to study within the government schools that one would find in the township. So that, I feel, is where I gained a lot of my exposure into the rest of the world, where I learned to compare and contrast what the rest of the world sees in a more modern, global village type thing, because of the accessibility one gets when they're in a main town and they're not just stuck in a township. I'm trying to think. Yeah, that was St. Paul's. So I went to that private school until grade 9, apologies. And in grade 9, or late grade 9, my parents got divorced. And my sole provider at the time, my father, was so... in the heat of the moment and the anger of everything at the time, he decided he wouldn't, because it was a private school, one had to pay, and he decided he was done. And that's when I ended up going to a very rural school in grade 10, which I think is a very, it's a very great impact on my life, because I now had a third vision and a third perspective to see. I went so rural that they didn't have flushing toilets. They used rainwater tanks. And I remember being so taken aback. I've never questioned some of the tiny privileges I've had even in a township, a toilet inside the house, safe running water. And I saw all these people, and I suddenly met all these people, or I was thrown into the middle of a different type of society or different type of neighborhood where the people were just as knit together. But what I learned more, or what was most different for me in that place, was they taught me how to make a plan. Not everything works out. If you don't have water, make a plan to get water. If the water gives you diarrhea, make a plan to stop the diarrhea. I always say that's the best weight loss program I've ever been on, 9 kgs in a week. But at the end of that year, in grade 10, which was 2015, my father and I reconciled, and he decided to start financing me again. And that's when I went on to Yugi High, which is a very small, cold town just in the northern parts of the Eastern Cape, very close to the Maluti Mountains, so close to Lesotho there, where I saw snow for the first time, where it gets so cold in winter that the water freezes in the pipes. And from Yugi High, that's when I matriculated and ended up in Bloemfontein in medical school, which is also another personal building experience on its own. And so the reason why I chuckled a bit when asked about my background was because whereas one would think school is just a one-time thing, or it's just a part of your life, you go to school, you come back. School for me was very up and down, and I had to actually learn, or it's where I learned a lot of things, and I saw a lot of perspectives, and I could compare and contrast so many different worlds and so many different mindsets and so many different people with their many different challenges, but many different pros as well. And Bloemfontein's been fun so far. I've learned a lot about myself because it's the first time I've ever been outside of the Eastern Cape. The fastest, if you drive quite fast, I'm a good 6 hours away from home, so I've had the ability to explore myself and my, how can I put it? I've been able to explore what I like, what I don't like. I've basically had to find and define myself outside of a familiar society, a familiar language, and I have it's funny because I have no background here, so I could start from scratch and be whoever I want to be, and I think that person is me. Yes, I'm in medical school, and I'm really enjoying that. It's actually an epiphany I came to last week because I was writing the entire week. It was end of block, and my time management skills are questionable. So I remember sleeping at most 4 hours a night trying to get everything done, and even before that with the rounds and everything. And I remember how amidst all of that fatigue, and the fatigue flows emotionally, mentally, spiritually as well, I remember thinking how I think this really is meant for me. Amidst all the challenges and everything that one has to fight that isn't medical school, I realized that I wouldn't even sacrifice all that I have for myself, but for a stranger somewhere who might need my help and my knowledge, I would definitely do this, and realized, as crazy as it may sound, I'd do it again. So the thought process, let's put it in inverted commas, the thought process behind medical school is actually quite funny. So I've always been, the reason why I chose medicine isn't because I've been dreaming about it since I was 8 years old, like most of my classmates would say. I remember I was in grade 11, And I've always been interested in science. I've always been interested in natural sciences, to be specific, how nature works, what I think is the glory of God's architecture, dynamic architecture. It fascinated me, and I initially wanted to be a microbiologist or chemist or biochemist. And my teacher at the time, my Afrikaans teacher and admitted very close friend, Mrs. Roetman, said, "You, Lutho, in a lab all alone, that doesn't sound right. Maybe try medicine." So I tried medicine because she said I wouldn't thrive in a lab all by myself talking to a petri dish. And in retrospect, it does make sense. And I never thought about, I've never thought about combining my love for people with my love for science and the natural sciences in itself. And I started frantically applying after that one literally 15-minute conversation. And as soon as I got in, I realized this is definitely where I want to be, definitely what I want to do. So I always joke around with a lot of close people that my destiny or my somewhat calling found me in a 15-minute conversation a month before the applications closed. So that was the thought process behind it, and it's quite impulsive. I'm very impulsive as well, but in that I feel like it's how my spirit drove me towards what I was supposed to do, and that was really it. And now that I am in medical school, I've made it in medical school, I'm going through medical school, my drive through it is my love for people, admittedly my love for God's people, which are all people. The science is still very fun, still very challenging. I'm still an academic at heart that loves thinking and making my head hot. But above all, it really is driven by my love for God's people, which translates into my love for a better society, which translates to my contribution to a better society, to a better life. And even if I can't change the world, I can at least change the world around me. So from a religious/spiritual perspective, I grew up Christian, and even growing up in my Christianity, I grew up Christian and I grew up in church, but I refound Jesus on my own. I think around 15, 16, 17, and the one voice I heard when God spoke to me, or the one voice that I heard, or the one face that I saw when I had my encounter with Jesus, is God saying, "I love you. I'm the God of love." And my relationship with God is one of that. It's one of love. In every way that I try to think into or relate into God, it's from a door of love. It's from a relation of love. All my whys, like all my questions, are based on, if you're a God of love, then why this? Or I can see you are a God of love. And repeatedly, he has presented himself as a God of love. And just to also put a few things out there, I may not say I'm religious, because I feel like that binds me to a particular doctrine or particular set of rules. I feel like my relationship with God is very dynamic. I'm trying to find God in many different ways other than the one way that I was taught. And this influence also comes from the fact that in my upbringing, as a Xhosa person, but also as a Christian, tradition and religion in a Christian sense were not separated for me. They always made sense together. And that has led me to further, not question, but to further look into the different faces of God to different people, and I'm in a space where I do not admittedly want to say I'm religious, but rather I'm finding my comfort zone, I'm finding my way of relating to God and the different ways in which we speak, which is still predominantly Christian-based. And my love for people comes from a particular verse that is quoted on my everything, which I feel sums up my life statement. It's like a mix between Old Testament and New Testament. I unfortunately can't quote it, but it goes something to the effect of, this law I give to you, love your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And the second law is equal in greatness to the first law. You will love yourself as you love thy neighbor. And to this day, that is the God I met. That is the God that continues to present himself to me. Love for God. And then that love for God translates to a love for God's people, and which is also quite hard for me, a love for myself. And that's why I do all I do, because another verse, once again, is how can you say you love God if you cannot, how can you say you love God you haven't seen if you cannot love your neighbor that you have seen? And my entire outlook on life is based on that. It's based on that one statement of, in any space that I am and in anything that I do, and thus translating professionally, I need to impact people's lives positively. I need to impact my life positively in order to truly love God that loves me so much. But it's also quite tricky, because if you can recall, I said predominantly Christian. So I look at a lot of other religious theories, Buddhists and African traditionalists. I look at a lot of esoteric mindsets and a lot of pagan mindsets, because I like to look into things before I dismiss them as well. So I wouldn't say I'm religious, I'd say I'm spiritual, but at the base of that is still Christianity with Christ, who I think currently is my love. So what do I identify as? I am a homosexual cisgender man. So to break down all of that, a homosexual, I think, I'm sorry, it's funny because even my homosexuality is pending. Let me rephrase, I'm a bisexual cisgender man. I'm a bisexual cisgender man. Bisexual being, I'm actually attracted to a whole horde of people. I'm attracted to many presentations of people, mostly men, or people that identify as men, but that also doesn't mean they have to be masculine men. I'm attracted to, or have been attracted to, very feminine presenting men. I'm attracted to non-binary people, no matter the presentation. And I'm attracted to women as well, but mostly masculine women. So it's a bit of the bisexuality part of me comes from me constantly reconstructing the notion of my own sexuality, because of the multiple questions I always find asking myself when I'm attracted to a different kind of person. But essentially I'm predominantly homosexual. My romantic relationship, sexual past usually is with men. The presentation of the men vary. And I do identify as a cisgender man because I feel very comfortable in the identification of a man. I feel like a man. I use he, him pronouns. Even though I do not present as a stereotypical man, I'm very feminine in my presentation, and it's something that I've always been feminine. From when I was a little boy, I remember I used to walk around in my grandma's skirts and heels, and it was fine. And then as I grew into a teenager, I was expected to behave a certain way in society and in the family. So before I was even aware of what my gender is, and before I was even aware of what my sexuality is, I knew to suppress that, whatever it was. And coming to university, I've explored a lot of that part of me. I've explored in particular, clothes, accessories, how I present myself, my walk, my accent. Generally, I think when I started living alone, I decided to be freely feminine. And in my femininity and in me not being or presenting as a stereotypical man, I still feel like a man, and I still feel like the label of a man. I relate to the label of a man, and I am currently in the thought of actually deconstructing gender and what gender means and what gender is, because I believe, or from what I've read and understood, gender is a social construct. It's a social box that you're put in, but now I don't fit into the box, or I don't do things that men do. Does that still qualify me as a man? But I don't feel like I relate to any other label. I've always felt like a man and just a feminine man. And that is how I've come to the conclusion that I am a bisexual, cisgender man. I definitely think I'm yet to evolve. Evolution is inevitable. The nature of life, or the nature of this dimension, has been such that of constant evolution. The only constant is truly change. So I'm very open, or I think I'm even a lot more open to the idea that I am yet to change, be it in my sexuality, be it in my gender presentation, be it in anything really. I am yet to change. I could not foresee myself in the place that I'm in, or in the identification that I'm in today 5 years ago, 2 years ago. And so I do not want to give my future self the pressure of having to adhere to a dream that, or to adhere to a label that I do not know yet. I do not know what I'm going to encounter. I do not know who I'm going to be after I encounter those things. So I definitely am leaving space for evolution. I definitely think I'm yet to evolve. People just straight out say, when did you know you were gay? When did you know you were queer? And answering that doesn't mean I can give a specific date. Personally, I didn't always acknowledge that I was not heterosexual, I was not straight. Earlier on, I did say that before I knew, or before I could come to terms with my own sexuality and gender presentation, or before I even knew what that was, the first thing I knew was to suppress that. So from a very young age, in the slow parts of my romantic and sexual developments, men always excited me. And whereas, it's all the small things that people say when you have a crush in class. My crush was always some boy somewhere. I remember having a very heated crush in, I think, grade 5. And we were friends. And of course he didn't know, because that would be shameful, not even from a homosexual point of view, but generally no one wants their crush to know in grade 5. And I always knew this, in as much as I suppressed it. I even had a girlfriend when I was 11, but I was actually very emotionally involved with her as well. I hope she's doing well. I was very emotionally involved with her. I don't feel like I forced anything, and because that was the norm, that was it, that was right at the time, and that was fine. I didn't question any of that. But after we broke up and I had to come to terms with myself as I started developing sexually and I started having wet dreams, all of my wet dreams were with men. All of the entities, all of the friends, they were all men. And in as much as I had tried to pray this away, I had tried to ignore this away, I've tried everything there is to try, girl. And it didn't work. So, for most people, it doesn't happen like this. But for me, I remember I think I was 14. I was 14 and I came to the uncomfortable realization that I'm actually attracted to men in a sexual, romantic way. And that's that. There's no, because I even remember before that, I used to say, I am going to have a sexual relationship with a man, because even back then, I could not fathom the idea of having a sexual relationship with a woman. And I'll marry a woman. My household is going to be man and woman, because marriage is man and woman, and only those two souls can bind. And then up until that day, when I was sitting on a random day and I realized, you're gay, that's when I came to terms with my sexuality. And I was very comfortable with that label and all my secret boyfriends and all my crushes and all my hookups. Ooh, I was comfortable. And then let's fast forward to 2018, first year. There was a young woman in the student accommodation where I lived. She was very masculine presenting, but I felt a profound attraction to her. I had a very big crush, and at some point I let her know, and it's been a motif since. I am attracted to some women, and I used to think I was attracted to masculinity because I tried to deconstruct my feelings as well, because I tried to understand myself to the best of my own ability. And then the same year, I was attracted to a very feminine presenting man, and that's when the whole box of my own sexuality started shattering. And in my heart of hearts, I truly believe that sexuality is becoming obsolete, and it should be obsolete because it shouldn't really influence anything. Attraction is attraction, and if the next person or the partner you're pursuing agrees to a relationship with the person, then I don't see anything wrong. So I might argue that we don't even need to label our sexuality or our gender on the basis of it shouldn't affect anything, or it shouldn't affect anything or anyone, because you are both consenting adults, or all three of you are consenting adults. And I feel like to an extent we define ourselves into a corner, and we really don't maybe need all those definitions and labels. And perhaps that would even be as comfortable as having a banner or a label to which you ascribe to which many other people ascribe to, and you can be comfortable in. So that's the story of me discovering my sexuality and understanding my gender presentation despite my clothing preferences. And to dive into that shortly, I never really questioned my gender, but I questioned my presentation of my gender, because I like pretty dresses, I like gloves, I like necklaces, I like rings, I like diamonds, I like lashes, and I like everything gorgeous. And I think that just plays a part in my femininity, and in my belief, clothes are genderless, and that shouldn't play any significant role in how I know myself, in how I identify with myself, as well as a comfortable man that happens to be feminine, that likes a string of pearls or a pretty dress or silken gloves. And yeah. Is homosexuality a choice? I do not think so. Can homosexuality be suppressed? Definitely. There's a coined term. It is called compulsory, we call it comhet, which means compulsory heterosexuality. And this refers to how most people in the past, older people that you speak to, were actually homosexual or non-heterosexual in their nature, but have suppressed that because there was no space to explore that. So that is to say, you have a conversation with a 60-year-old woman and you realize that she's never been attracted to or liked men, but she's been married for 50 years and she's just living a life or building a life with her husband, with whom she tolerates for the sake of tolerating, and they might basically speak about or show the characteristics of homosexuality or non-heterosexuality, but rather were heterosexual because they had to. I do not think homosexuality definitely is a choice, also based on the fact that I don't think anyone would bear so much discrimination and self-hate and so much questioning if they couldn't. If I, speaking, could change being feminine, if I could change liking men, I would for myself, and all the discrimination I faced and all the bullying I faced growing up. I would change it for my family. I'm an only son. I'm my father's only son, and my society is patriarchal, meaning I'm the only one that can carry his family name. So, and that's also in blood, that's also in children that you have yourself biologically. I would change it for my community to simply assimilate better and not struggle so much. But yet I've had to learn to fight for the opposite because this is the way I am, and this I feel is the way most people are. And I also think that the many, many dead bodies or the many, many buried queer people everywhere can also attest to having changed if they could, but they couldn't and they didn't. I don't think my sexuality has a specific event that triggered it or that influences it. I do admit and understand that some people have a traumatic experience to relate their sexuality to, but personally, I do not have an event to which I can bind that. I have always been this way for as long as I've been sentient, for as long as I can remember, for as long as I could think in my own head. And that is how aware I was to, suppress that. I grew up in a home. The only perhaps traumatic thing that one might say was our financial circumstance. I do not recall being in a space where I did anything I do not want to with anyone I don't want to. If anything, my background is so conservative that sex and sexuality are taboo. The one thing perhaps I can even try trace it back to is that there was free reign over the TV. So I didn't have restrictions to what I could watch, and because of that, I remember, I think I was like 7, I accidentally, because I was up late watching TV, and I saw porno for the first time in my life accidentally at 7 years old. But even that was a heterosexual porno, and it wasn't anything, it wasn't anything shocking, but it wasn't stimulating for me. So it's always been me. From my personal experience, I've always been attracted to men, or I've always been attracted to people that just don't present the normal cisgender heterosexual type way. there's nothing I can base my sexuality on to say it's an avoidance with anything or it's in response to anything. The only thing, however, that I can base to my upbringing is, it's not necessarily a label, but it's a description of self. I do think I'm hypersexual, and I think that might also stem from having to suppress and avoid and ignore all of the sense of sex and sexuality and not being in a space to adequately acknowledge and understand that, because even a girlfriend I wasn't allowed to have. I wasn't allowed to think in such a way. I wasn't allowed to explore that part of my development. And I think perhaps the guilt-reward response some way in my personality has now led me to become a hypersexual. So a hypersexual essentially is someone that not bases a lot of their personality on sex, but could have sex every other day, any day, every day. I could have any kind of sex anywhere. Not necessarily with anyone, but with most people. It's really just a prevalence, or it's you're just drawn to being sexual, and it's not something, it's not your whole life, but it may be somewhat a significant part. Or I like to also think I'm very slightly sexual or flirtatious in how I present myself, or in how I think, or in all my jokes and conversations. And even in myself, a lot of my self-confidence I've gained taking nude pictures and nude videos of myself and being able to see myself in the light of desire. So I think a lot of my personality, or chunk of it, is very in relation to sex, and I'm very explorative with regards to sex and what sex is and what it entails and so forth. A big chunk, I honestly can't speak on anyone else's experience, but I know for a fact that a big chunk of especially homosexual men are hypersexual, and to such an extent that I think not to my detriment, but to my dismay, that has become a big chunk of our community, and there isn't space to explore anything but. Even a hypersexual like myself, you start feeling like a piece of meat, and I feel like it's really to the detriment of a lot of people in the community, such that you can only view yourself in the light of desire, and whether you're desirable or not. And that on its own entails a lot of racist, fatphobic, femphobic nonsense. And by that I mean fatphobic refers to the discrimination of fat people or larger people, and that doesn't stem from a concern from their health. And femphobic stems from misogyny, in a sense, the hate of femininity in men, and how frowned upon. You'd think gay people would like other gay presenting people, but it's really quite frowned upon. And in the desirability politics of being a homosexual man, most people hide that or are ashamed of that, and there's a lot of discrimination against feminine and fat people that is very akin to, or that looks too much like, misogyny. And even racism on its own, there is somewhat of a social desire hierarchy, and it's the typical Nazi type: the brighter, lighter you are, the better. So I think, for instance, there are, to answer the question, definitely a lot of homosexual men are hypersexual for their own reasons, but I think we need to start viewing our own community as a community, as people, life partners, and active people in the community, and not just a piece of meat that you can meet in a bathroom somewhere on Grindr. And Grindr is like Tinder for gay people, but it's more a hookup app than it is a let's go out on a date app. And those are my views on that. Am I open to polyamory? I don't know yet. In my mental situations, I don't think I am. Emotionally, I bind very strongly to a lot of my people, even on a platonic level. So I don't think I could, I think they call it a polycule. I don't think I could be a part of a polycule. I'm monogamous, and there's nothing also in that from the outside. I also don't think there's anything wrong with polyamorous people or people that ascribe to a polycule, given that everyone is aware and consents. That is the one thing that separates cheating and a polycule. All of the members involved should know that they're in a polycule and they should be safe and consent to that. Otherwise, personally, I'm much too jealous and clingy and clingy, yeah. So my thoughts on the LGBTQI plus community, I must first put it out there that according to my understanding, the Rainbow Fam, the Rainbow Mafia, I like to call them that. The Rainbow Mafia is a dual purpose movement for freedom of sexuality and expression thereof, and freedom of gender expression. So with regards to sexuality, I do not have a problem, and I find that actually I do have a problem. I do have a problem with the expectation of not most non-heterosexual people, but I have a problem with non-heterosexual people that have a propensity, or that have like how can I put it, a preference or move towards more heterosexual, straighter presenting people, because I feel that is very predatory in some sense. For instance, you get a lot of people that take pride in wanting to turn people or turning people, and I think that in its sense is very predatory, it's very rapey. It doesn't seem right, and that is not to say, just for a more contextualized example, that is not to say that a homosexual man that likes masculine presenting men are a problem. That is not a problem. The problem is homosexual men that like straight men, or that like to move towards turning or flirting or seducing straighter or straight men, or evidently straight men. I feel that is a breach of consent, that is a breach of a lot of things, autonomy overall. And with regards to the gender movement as well, I am very supportive of trans rights, and I feel like as long as the person is aware and soundly aware of their gender, or lack of gender rather, if they fully understand that, then it isn't a problem, because I do not feel like there's any harm they do in their presentation. And I know of a lot of people with regards to with trans people that change, or with non-binary people that change something physically, that want to revert back to it. I don't think that's a problem anyway. I don't find it problematic, and even with regards to their expectations and how they aim to be addressed in society, I stand with them, and I feel like you can address a person in whichever way that they feel comfortable, that doesn't impede you, because I don't think it impacts anyone. If I were to come presenting as a male and I were to tell you I actually identify as a woman and my pronouns are she, her, or I'm non-binary and my pronouns are they, them, I don't think that hurts anyone. And I feel the most you can do is respect someone. And I really do have a problem with people that go out of their way to bring down those people or to abuse those people. And not too long ago, I had a conversation with a person that was talking about particularly male to female transitions, and they were speaking about how these people are feigning or they're faking womanhood, and they are benefiting of the minority rights of being a woman without having gone through the struggles of being a woman in society. And I do partially understand that, and I do partially understand some women feeling or some men feeling like trans people are pushing them out of the benefits of their own space. But that begs to, and I remember one of the thing was they are feigning or faking womanhood because of how they dress and their hyper femininity. But then the question also begs, who's to say that womanhood is grounded in femininity? What if that is the way that woman chose to present? And I really don't see a problem with trans people, and by trans people I mean an umbrella term for people that identify in a gender other than that which they were birthed in. So that encompasses non-binary people, agender people, and people that transition from one gender to another. And I feel they deserve the respect they need, because I see no detriment in their existence. Live and let live, essentially. So there's been an increasing prevalence, or there's been an increasing notion of pedophiles wanting to have their pedophilia as a recognized sexuality and thus a part of the LGBTQI agenda, for which, for most of my part, from what I can understand, the most of the community completely rejects this notion. They've even they call themselves minor attracted people. But this, for me, goes against the very notion of the community and what we stand for, because it is to someone's detriment. You can't give consent if you do not know what consent is. You can't give consent if you are in a manipulable state. And that is the ethos of most careers and professionalities. Autonomy is the number one thing. If a human has one thing or should have one thing at all times, it's their dignity and autonomy, the independence to make their own decisions. And so, in as much as I feel, or according to me, the community, or even within myself, I would not support rape, because that is a breach of consent. I cannot support people that are manipulating and hurting children that do not understand what's going on. You cannot give consent if you don't know what it entails, what it means, and you do not know the repercussions of. And as an adult, I think everyone has a capacity to do that. So I completely reject the notion of pedophiles being a part of the movement, or even if they also argue there's nothing they can do about it. I feel you cannot hurt people for the sake of your own self. That does not stand with the common ethos of humanity. The manner in which my bisexuality has impacted my relationships, on a platonic friendship level, the only thing it's done is I've only made friends, but I've mostly made friends with people that are within the thought system, or not, but like-minded people, that is in being queer, or that is simply being of open mind. I can't really speak on how it may affect my family life, because we've never had the conversation together. We've never had the open conversation. And this comes from my decision that I feel like growing up, I've always been very transparent. I'm a very transparent person in how I am and how I speak. And I've always been like this at home as well. And part of me feels like I do not need to come out for anything. I do not need to come out to anyone. And in as much that in as much as that may perhaps avoid an uncomfortable situation, to an extent, it also feels like I'm letting my family as adults come to their own conclusion and deal with things as their own adults, coming to terms with an uncomfortable truth. And I say uncomfortable truth because my family's cultural and religious standing is very, what was known as conservative. And so I assume they would not accept my bisexuality, and perhaps I'm not even in a space to fight that with them currently. So it has affected the relationship, actually, in a sense that there's a part of my life that I simply do not speak about, or that I'm simply not transparent about. But I also partially, perhaps even in my delusion, feel like I'm letting them come to their own comfortable conclusions. And either way, I am still me. So as a Xhosa man, I truly understand that I've also had to reconcile a lot of my tradition with not only my sexuality but general gender presentation and what stereotypes I'm expected to ascribe to in the community to be an acceptable man or respected man. And surprisingly, a lot of them don't impact on sexuality. So as a homosexual person, there isn't really a problem with me being homosexual within the culture. Perhaps it's in the nitty-gritty of, should I choose to marry if I believe in the institution of marriage? How does that go? But on a cultural philosophy, it really doesn't impact a lot of the responsibility within the Xhosa nation that I have. What is a problem, however, is the presentation of femininity, because it is, and as much as it is beautiful and patriarchal, it is also quite misogynistic. And so any man that presents femininely is seen as less of a man, and that's also a lot that I've had to fight, and that's also a lot I've had to overcompensate for in everything that I am otherwise, as a feminine presenting man, because that is an issue. And personally, I don't feel any less of a Xhosa man because of my femininity, and I don't feel any less valid within the communities because I do uphold the respect and generosity that I feel is the pillar of our society, closely rooted in the South African philosophy of Ubuntu, of a community that is together, a community that is a family. So that's my, not view, but that's my view and interaction with my culture and my sexuality and gender. The one thing I wish everyone would understand, that I wish everyone would adopt, is that ignorance does not equal hate, and there's always space to ask questions. I wish everyone would understand that if you don't understand someone, or if you don't understand something, you can rather ask than bash or discriminate or abuse. There's always space to basically ask questions. There's always space to find out, and this is even within the community with people that don't not agree but don't understand some parts of the community. There's always space to ask. There's always space to find out, and to accept doesn't mean to agree with as well, but it simply means to let people live as they live. And on a third perspective, what I wish people would also understand within themselves is that find out about yourself. You evolve constantly, and that isn't a bad thing. Find out why you feel the way you do about certain things. Find out why you disagree with some things. Find out why parts of your personality aren't in agreement with the rest of you. Basically, I wish everyone was more curious than hateful, within and on the outside. What do I think people see when they look at me? I can never. It's also a recurring thought I have that I can never look at myself from the outside. But what I do hope people see in my presentation of self, in whatever aspect is, I hope they see someone they can talk to. And by that I mean, I hope that I create a space where people can ask about me, where people can explain or unload about themselves. Basically, I hope to present myself as a comfortable, open book, a person that people can ponder things they've been thinking about with. And essentially, that's what I mean when I hope people see someone they can talk to. But in the base of it all, I hope that when people see me, they see love. A person that loves them, a person that allows them to love themselves. That really is my life's work in a nutshell, in how I wake up, in my studies, in what I do, in who I hang around with, in how I present myself to the people, and even in the most intimate spaces. A lot of space. What I wish you would have asked was with regards to my views as a predominant Christian and how I reconcile that with my sexuality and my how I combine that with my views on the transgender and general spirituality. And with that, that specific community, the Christian community, I feel, for me, I used to actually hate myself about it. I used to try and pray it away. But if God loves me as I am, who am I to stand against that? And the God that I've met and the God that speaks to me, not in miraculous visions and voices, but the God that speaks to me in the people I meet, the God that speaks to me in my quiet space, is one of love. So I love the people I love, and I love myself as I am, and I really hope that Christians remember that our one call is to love. I once again was not given the gift to quote, but I know a scripture that says, go into the world and love one another, for then they will know that you are my disciples. So that's, I really hope we can circle back to love. And this is also coming from someone who grew up religiously with rules, and religion and Christianity was this rigid thing where you couldn't exist. And only when I found Christ did I realize that Christ is not a monster. Christ, when he said come as you are, he meant come as you are. And sometimes within our own self, we judge ourselves, we do everything that we wouldn't do to anyone else, and I think that's just as wrong. Because, yeah, so that's how I reconcile my thoughts or my social philosophies on my sexuality and Christianity. Do I want to share anything else? Be adventurous. Yeah, that's all I also want to say. Be adventurous. Try new things. Sometimes I definitely believe in you can't knock it until you try it. So try some things. Maybe don't try some things. But be adventurous, obviously within the comforts of your body and your soul. But don't be boring. Don't be boring, and love, man. Love people, love yourself. Love God in whichever way that you find God, because it really goes a long way. And I think that's it. It is a pleasure. This was very lovely. This was quite nice.